encourage you to go back. It was really good, had some wonderful presenters. And I'll say it again, I know I got several church members that need to engage in that mental matters piece. And I did call Tasha Taylor to see if all of her people tuned in for that particular session. All right. First Peter chapter number 5 is where we are. First Peter chapter number 5. So go ahead and find that. And this was not, to be honest with you, this was not the Bible study I had originally intended, but I kind of got caught up into it. And so I just kind of learned to kind of go with the flow a little bit. And so First Peter chapter number 5 is where I want to go. I want to read the passage. And once I read the passage, we'll kind of talk a little bit about it. First Peter chapter number 5. And again, for those that may be tuned in or review this later on, this is Bible study. So we're able to relax a little bit and study a little bit. So YouTube and what now?
Facebook and Zoom.
YouTube, Facebook, and Zoom. And you can call in and all that stuff. So we're getting high tech around here, fellowship. We're trying our best anyway. So we're grateful for those that are helping us out as it relates to that. So let's engage in our study. So if you're just tuning in, Natasha, First Peter chapter number 5 is where we are. First Peter chapter number 5. And beginning with verse number 5, this is Peter. The author is Peter. Peter wrote First Peter as a disciple. He wrote First Peter and he also wrote Second Peter. And so this is his first letter to the church in general, to the Christians at that particular time, kind of what we call a general epistle, or an epistle is a public letter. So here's what he says, verse 5, likewise, you younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yes, all of you be subject one to another. And look at this, he says, and be clothed with humility. For, here's why, for God resisteth the proud and giveth grace to the humble. God resisteth the proud. Sister Gwen, Mother Gwen Parker, God resists the proud and giveth grace to the humble. Verse 6 says, humble yourselves therefore under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. And then verse 7 says, casting all your care upon him, for he, talking about God, he careth for you. I'll go ahead and read verse 8 and 9. We won't have time to talk about it tonight, but maybe the next time around. He says, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. Verse 9, final verse, he says, whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. And so now we have the reading of the word of the Lord. Now, if you'll notice in the first 3 verses, the idea of humility comes up. And so when I'm looking at it, he says in verse 5, submit yourselves, be clothed with humility. Then he says, God resists the proud, give it grace to the humble. Verse 6, watch this, humble yourselves. So he's talking about humility. Verse 7, even at that, he's talking about humility, casting all your care upon him, for he careth for you. And casting has to do with humility because it deals with throwing upward. And so what I want to do a Bible study on tonight about, and this is the topic or title that I've pinned here, I just want to say, bring it down a notch. That's our study. Bring it down a notch. Bring it down. Yeah, that's good. Just text somebody. How do you say it? Facebook too? We do Facebook? Comment to somebody and tell them, bring it down a notch. Just bring it down a notch. And it's a lesson, ladies and gentlemen, on humility. And it is coming from the word of God. So Petronella, text somebody and tell them, bring it down a notch. For my classmate in Laurel, Mississippi, watching tonight, Mary Allen, bring it down a notch. Or how some of the young folks might say it, have a seat. Just have a seat. Just have a seat. Same thing, same concept that we're talking about. It is a lesson on humility. It is a lesson on humility. And so as it relates to this, I may go around about just for a second to make sure that we do have the context a little bit. Peter, again, is the author, and he knew that a fiery trial was about to take place and occur for the people of God. And so he is writing this letter to encourage them as it relates to the trouble, the trials, and the tribulations that they are undergoing. And so in this, that's the whole concept or whole context of the letter that he is writing. And so because he knew that, then he is trying to tell them a couple of things. And one of the things he's going to tell them is this. One of the first things is be humble. Even though you're going through, he's going to say be humble. He's also going to say be watchful, and he's also going to say be hopeful. And so we're going to just focus on the idea of us being humble. When you look at this also, Peter has been talking about submission all throughout the epistle. All throughout the epistle, he's been talking about submission. In 1 Peter chapter 2, he talks about, he's encouraging the saints to be submissive to governmental authorities, to be submissive to governmental authorities. And people are talking a little bit about that even now. Because of what's going on with the pandemic and that kind of stuff, and the government is saying close down, and the churches from the standpoint of having large gatherings or large crowds and all, and so people are talking about that. But Peter did mention that. He says to slaves and masters, which some would interpret that employee and employers. He says to the employees, you should be submissive to your employer. He says to wives that they should be submissive to their husbands. Call Sherry and see if she's listening right there. Wives, he says, it's in the Bible. I'm not making it up. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 1 through 7. It's in the Bible. I promise it's there. All right. And now he says to the younger, be subject to the elder. To the younger, be subject to the elder. And that's what's in the passage. And then he ends it like this. He says, we all really should be subject to each other. We should be subject to each other. Now he's going to get into speaking about humility. Now let me kind of make sure that we engage in defining that. What is humility? And I wanted to clearly define it, clearly defining humility, bring it down a notch, take a seat, all of that stuff. I wanted to clearly define it. And as it relates to that, humility, it comes from this particular Greek word. It is a big word, and I won't even try to pronounce it. But humility, please get this. Humility deals with being humble in mind. It deals with modesty. It deals with humility of mind or lowliness of mind. That's sort of what it is talking about. Humility deals with how you think of yourself. What's your viewpoint of view, basically? What is your viewpoint of view? And so it's a modesty is what we deal with. In the word, when I'm looking at it, it keeps referencing the mind, because it is you lowering yourself and not thinking more highly of yourself than you ought to, but it has to do with how you think about yourself, how you think about yourself. And so when we look at this, humbleness of mind or humility of mind or lowliness, can I suggest to you how you think of yourself will soon be expressed in